Wonderful. Yeah, let's begin. So, of course, thank you so much for being here today. And hello, Robert. My name is Mohammed. I'm here on behalf of AI Policy Labs on our podcast series on a very important topic, AI and Sustainable Development Goals with the UN. And I'm, of course, a policy assistant with them based in London, if my accent doesn't give it all away. But yeah, of course.
And your accent does give it away, yes.
Yeah, sometimes it comes out just a little bit anyway. But yeah, just to give a brief insight into who we are, who AI Policy Labs are. We're a global initiative which has been set up with a vision to explore emerging technologies and assess the impact of intelligent automation, digitalization, and artificial intelligence on policymaking, implementation, and governance. Our primary focus is to explore the role of AI for public goods and AI for social good. And given the rise of automation and the uses of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, it became extremely important to ask ourselves, especially with only a decade left to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, what role AI and other emerging technologies can play in either aiding or perhaps even hindering society. And with the vision to build upon these important issues, we've launched our program AI and SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, which will comprise of a series of podcasts, webinars, and reports, and of course, expert opinions such as yours on these important issues in partnership with the Graduate Institute in Geneva. And the formal launch event for this is on the 15th of December. And as part of the program, we are conducting this podcast series. And today's focus will be on the 8th Sustainable Development Goal, decent work and economic growth. And given the vast experience of the guests we have today, there is really no one better to help us out. For reference, to anybody who might not be aware, Robert Seamans is an associate professor at New York University's Stern School of Business, where he teaches courses in game theory and strategy. Professor Seamans' research focuses on how firms use technology and their strategic interactions with each other, and also focuses on the economic consequences of AI, robotics, and other advanced technologies. His research has been published in leading academic journals and has been cited in numerous outlets, including The Atlantic, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, among others. And in 2015, Professor Seamans was appointed as the Senior Economist for Technology and Innovation on President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. So it is fair to say we are in good hands and nobody is in any position to question the expertise we are gracious enough to have today. So if, without further ado, if you're okay to get into the questions, unless I've missed anything.
Absolutely. No, you haven't missed anything. That's a very kind introduction, but feel free to question anything that I say, please.
Oh. I'll do my best. So if we should begin, in your view, how can AI help in meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly in achieving decent work and economic growth for all? And if possible, can you pick a few examples to showcase which sectors will have the maximum potential for growth with AI?
Sure. So where I like to start is with, I like to zoom way out and start with the broad macroeconomic picture. And the broad macroeconomic picture, at least for advanced economies, is that we have been in a period of slowing economic growth, right? So economies are growing, but at an ever slower rate. And so, we are all looking for ways to try to boost that growth. Historically, general purpose technologies, of which AI looks like it is one, are the types of things that boost growth. And so the big picture story is a good story, right? The big picture story is that thanks to AI, we should get a boost to economic growth around the world, including in advanced economies. Mm. So I guess that's the good news. As I understand the Sustainable Development Goal, the goal number 8, around achieving decent work and economic growth for all, the key piece of that is the for all part, right? And so the question is, are we going to get growth? Yes. Is it going to be growth for everybody? Will everybody share in these gains? So that's not a question of the technology, right? I mean, the technology will lead to economic growth. Whether everybody shares in it or not, that's a policy question. I hope that everybody can share in this, but frankly, it's going to vary sector by sector. It's going to vary industry by industry. It's going to vary country by country, and even within different demographic groups within countries, all depending on a variety of other factors that are not due to the technology per se, or at least not entirely due to the technology per se, but are due to other sort of institutional features. Sorry, we have a visitor who just came through. And he's heading back out.
It's the joys of working from home, believe me.
There we go. Working from home. Maybe we can use some AI to sort of pretend that that didn't happen.
Oh, I wish.
Yeah, no. So again, I think that a really important piece here is the policy and what types of policies are we going to have in place, such that that all the value that because I think it's important, right, that the value that gets created from this new technology it doesn't end up concentrated in the hands of a few, but is broadly dispersed, and that many folks can take part in it and can benefit from it. So you asked for some examples. I think that we already see many little examples, right? Many examples of sort of small applications throughout the economy already, right? So this could range from things like using your phone to navigate from one place to another. Or it could be something like starting to type an email to someone, and then the sort of predictive typing comes up and the sentence starts to get finished for you. The Zoom calls that we're doing right now, or to the extent that someone uses a virtual background, which perhaps I should have been using a moment ago. All of those are wonderful applications of AI. They're relatively small in the big scheme of things. Do they all improve welfare for people? Yes, they do. Do they boost growth? Maybe a little bit here and there. I think really what we're waiting for are some, what I would call sort of like big, quote unquote, killer apps, right? Where once we see the technology in those places, that's really where we're going to start to see some of the big changes and a lot of the growth. So let me just sort of like rewind history, if you will, just to give you an example from another era. So when electricity first came out, there are many different ways in which it got used, but really one of the big killer apps is that electricity got used to lift elevators and to light buildings, and that led to skyscrapers, right? I mean, it's something that just didn't even exist beforehand, and it wouldn't have been possible but for electricity. And so, the question is, where in our economy are we going to see those types of things? Two places that I'd like to look are autonomous vehicles and healthcare. With autonomous vehicles, I think that there will be a lot of changes in terms of driving and driving habits and things like that. So that's sort of one big area where I think we'll see it, but I think it's going to take much longer than people realize. And then the other is healthcare. And there really, I think there's sort of huge benefits that everybody can benefit from. You can imagine things like predictive healthcare, or trying to predict where a disease hotspot might break out, and then you can imagine sort of putting in place different mechanisms to prevent that from happening. And so I get excited about those types of applications.
Yeah, that's it.
In terms of where we see AI a lot right now, I think actually we're seeing it in a lot of places where there's not a huge potential for there to be these sort of game-changing killer app type things happening. And so that would be places like, frankly, in sales and in finance. AI gets used a lot in sales to sort of predict what someone who's interacting with, I don't want to use the name of a specific online company, but imagine I'm online doing some shopping, the predictive analytics that gets done, and that might do a little bit of a better job of targeting stuff for me. But really, the AI that's being used there, it's being used almost in competition with other companies that are developing their own. And so you're seeing lots of investment, but it's not necessarily increasing growth. It's just making sure that you're not losing market share to a competitor. And I think we see the same in finance as well, with things like algorithmic trading and things like that.
Yeah, especially with the rise of like financial technologies. I think it's also interesting what you said about how some of these areas are almost ones that you wouldn't initially perceive. The example you use of electricity, I think, is great, and that I think it's a large expense, but I think it links also quite nicely to my second question. Of course, I'm trying not to keep you for too long, but it is believed that there is a high likelihood of increasing inequality between nations with the rise of AI. And in your view, what is the best way to develop and share AI across borders to ensure that lesser developed countries are not left behind in an economic shift, thereby widening any possible economic divides?
So I think it's a great question. Unfortunately, it's not one I've spent a lot of time thinking about.
It's a difficult question, sorry.
I don't have a good answer here. I don't have a good, yeah. And so I'll leave it at that. I think it's a great question. I think it'll be important to see.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that maybe the one thing to note that's maybe a little bit different from other episodes of these general purpose technologies, like electrification, for example, is that we now have these really large multinational companies that are located in, most, probably not all, but like most, and in some cases, if not all, countries around the world. And to the extent that these companies start rolling out more or less the same technology everywhere, then you'll start to see technology that might be developed in one country fairly rapidly being, let's call it like democratized to other countries. Now, to the extent that individuals in those other countries actually benefit from it or are able to, to the extent that they're like spillovers and entrepreneurial ventures in those other countries spring up around the use of those technologies. I'm not sure. Maybe that'll depend a fair bit on how closely protected the technology is and things like that.
Yeah, but I also think what you said at the start, once again, incredible. It is a difficult question. It is one that, despite there being a lot of research into, the answers aren't there yet, and we don't have. And I think part of the process we have to do is admitting that as a society we are struggling to come up with certain answers. And yeah, no, thank you. It was really interesting. But also, pressing on, I was wondering your thoughts on if AI would increase job prospects or reduce them worldwide, and if it is possible to upskill enough people at the rate required to fill these high skilled jobs which AI will create, and if so, what's the best way to achieve this? Sorry, I know these are big questions, hard hitters.
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is that there's sort of three buckets of things that can happen with jobs, right? You could get jobs that are totally replaced, right? AI substitutes entirely for a job. Another bucket is that there's a brand new job that gets created because of AI. And then the third bucket is that AI augments in some way an existing job. And so that could be augmenting in the sense that before I was spending a lot of time actually typing out stuff, whereas now I can use the predictive typing to sort of more quickly do typing, right? So that'd be one example of the augmentation. A separate type of augmentation that could happen is if I'm in an upstream sector, let's say, and AI, and I'm sort of selling my product into a downstream sector, and because of AI, suddenly there's a lot more demand for that, for whatever that downstream sector good or service is. That then implies that there's going to be a need for a lot more of the upstream inputs that I am now supplying. And so that's another way in which, sort of a demand-based way in which AI can augment jobs, right? And so in the sector that I'm in, you would need to hire more people in order to meet that downstream demand. So overall, I expect that job prospects are quite good. Just like with other general purpose technologies, I would think that we're going to see, so general purpose technologies tend to increase productivity, and everything we know from the past is that when you get an increase in productivity, that then leads to an increase in jobs. Now the question though is where, so that's an increase in jobs on net, right? Yeah. And then there could be a whole lot of heterogeneity across sectors. To the extent that, let's say that let's say that there's three sectors that are affected. One, you get a decline in jobs, and then the other two is where you're expecting to see the increase in jobs. The key thing isn't upskilling necessarily, but just the ability to be mobile from the sector that's losing the jobs to the sector that's gaining the jobs, right? And so again, this is a sort of more of a policy question. Like sort of a policy issue around what types of mobility barriers do we have in place, and what types of policies can we implement to get those mobility barriers out of the way. as opposed to something like upskilling and the idea that you might need a new set of sort of higher order skills in order to get a job. I think that there will be some of that, but I think that what will be much more important is just making sure that people can move relatively easy from one sector to another, or for that matter, from one country to another. And so I think another big issue here, and this is now where I'm going to sort of maybe step into slightly politically fraught issues.
Please do.
But I think a big issue here is around immigration policies. I'm based in the U.S., so not just in the U.S., with regards to the U.S. and other countries, but I think for all countries that this is going to be a big issue. You might see reallocation of individuals from one country to another, where skills are sort of in more demand in one country versus the home country of wherever that individual is. And I guess my prediction would be that the countries that, as we're really starting, we're not quite there yet, but within the next 10 to 20 years, we'll really start to see some growth, I'm predicting, from this new technology, from AI. And I think that the countries that will benefit the most are going to be the countries that have relatively loose immigration policies. Okay, and so the current administration here in the U.S. Does not have an immigration policy like that. It has a very restrictive immigration policy. There's actually some early evidence that the U.S. has been hurt by that, in the sense that data, scientists, be they data scientists or computer scientists, are choosing to go to places like Canada or the UK or other places rather than coming into the US, rather than coming into Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, or other places. And so in the short term, we've been hurt by that. I think that that's unfortunate for our country. I am hopeful that the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, will address that going forward.
Absolutely. That's a really insightful take on the matter. A lot of the literature tends to focus on purely upskilling, but you've shown how it's such a multifaceted problem and that it has to be approached from many angles. I think that's quite a refreshing perspective to have on the matter. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And now let me just say, it's not that I mean, upskilling is important,
of course.
But I guess my take is your take is, which is that a lot of folks already talk about that, and I think there's another angle that's equally as important, if not more important, frankly, for most individuals and for most of their jobs, which is just the ability to move freely across sectors and across countries.
That's wonderful. Thank you. If you have one time for one final question, and then I'll leave you in peace. Thank you. So it's a more of a personal one, but in 2015, you were appointed as Senior Economist for Technology and Innovation on President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. A fantastic achievement. And what were some of the burning concerns and challenges with respect to technology and AI in achieving economic growth? And can you share some experiences of what it was like dealing with them, if that's possible? Oh, apologies, I think I've lost connection. Hello, sorry, did I cut out?
I see you. You cut out for a moment there.
Sorry, did you manage to hear all the question, or shall I repeat it?
I did. You want me to give my answer? Do you want me to give my answer again?
Yes, please.
Sure.
Sorry about this.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so thank you. So it was a great year that I spent. Let me just explain a little bit more about it. So the Council of Economic Advisors, individuals who work on the Council of Economic Advisors, basically serve as the name might suggest, as advisors to policymakers. The CEA doesn't actually create its own policy. It just sort of advises on economic impact of different policies very early on in the policy process. Many of the folks that work at CEA are people like me, academics that work at a university, or some other branch of government like the Federal Reserve or something like that, and then do a one-year appointment to serve in this position before going back to their home institution, which is what I did coming back here to New York University. So it was a fantastic experience. AI and robots were one of the issues that cropped up really early on in my time there. And so the chair of CEA at that time was someone named Jason Furman. He suggested that we write a chapter for what's called the Economic Report of the President on this topic. And so we had an entire chapter devoted to robots and AI. Now, and so that it was fun to sort of dive into some of the early material, some of the early data that was out there. But at that point, there really wasn't much data that was out there. And so a lot of what we did is we spent a fair bit of time just sort of thinking about how prior episodes of automation had affected the economy in terms of macroeconomic effects, as well as labor market effects and things like that. The important thing to point out is, recall I said that part of what CEA does is advises on policy that's being created. At that point in time, there wasn't any policy around AI and robots that was being created, so we weren't actually advising on any policy. Now that being said, there were things that would come up from time to time around, let's say, like certain segments of the economy. So, for example, one might imagine that maybe there were some things around autonomous vehicles that was coming up. And so, again, CEA's role would have been to just to try to bring some of the frameworks that an economist would bring to thinking about the problems that are cropping up. But again, there weren't really any really big policies around AI and robots at that point in time. So it was more just trying to think from a bigger picture point of view about how these technologies would be affecting the economy.
Well, that's fascinating. It's interesting to get some inside knowledge on the subject of exactly what's going on within the policymakers. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time and your expertise, everything. It has been amazing for me and amazing for everybody listening. This is incredible. Thank you.
Good to hear. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. It's always fun to talk about these topics. And hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, maybe we could meet up in person and talk in greater detail about these.
That'd be wonderful. No, thank you again. Great. Amazing. Thank you. Take care.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.